Staying attuned, a poetic gaze, backwards and forward, with folks both brilliant and humble.
I beat myself up all the time as a parent, especially because there are all these goals and measurements for your children. You know, they should be in 75 extracurricular activities and be super whatever.
Right.
Are they happy? Are they smiling? Do they go to sleep peacefully? Are they taken care of? Do they feel loved? I'm good. You know, and I'm not measuring myself by this society that we're in. It's so unhealthy.
Organizer She, mom, poet, and plenty free, humility dart. Our guest today is Kara Leinfelder. She is a poet, mother, and has been a nonprofit creative professional for over 23 years. Like all our guests, she has many other things too, and we'll dive into that now. It's called Passably Professional. Impossibilities usually defeat, as we are conditioned to characterize our attempts to create as the audacity to do so. But my greatest effort is to normalize reaching for it. And audaciousness need not be, because we prop up and we walk beside our future collaborators directly and implied.
I have a lot of feelings about that already. Like immediately.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What's the one that strikes most?
The one that strikes most is the line about the two times you mentioned audacity, especially as my perspective as a female in this world, navigating this world, having the audacity to be creative and successful at the same time. And not that I'm terribly great at either necessarily, but it is a challenge. So that's how I took it.
Could you explain the difference between you said be creative or successful? You mean like
it feels like you have
monetary?
To choose one. It feels like you have to choose one. And maybe everybody feels that way. And if you're creative in your profession, then that's a whole other layer to that. As if you can only be creative professionally or personally, you can't have them both at the same time. And it may be just filtering that through my current workspace mindset, but I think that's incredibly challenging as a person whose brain is always in the mode of writing. Like I'm never not writing. There's always a tab open somewhere that's writing poetry, that's thinking about creative. Like I can't not look at this beautiful landscape around us and not think about what I can create in this spot. But I'm also this person who's doing this job for this in this environment that's very demanding in a city where Raleigh's a big city or it thinks it's a big city, but it's really still a small town. I don't know, the audacity to be both. And I think it's particularly challenging, especially if you've been like in the work environment in a town like this for a very long time. And that may not be at all what you're writing about, but that's just the first thing I thought of.
No, that's great. I can tell you more, but I want to ask a little more. So the audacity to, I guess I'm interested in does it take more audacity to create as your job, or more audacity to hold as you do two things?
The holding of two things.
And why do you say that? And I only say that because it feels like to me, the audacity to say, well, my shit's good enough to pay me is maybe audacious. I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, I mean...
Yeah. Maybe it's because I've lived in Raleigh for a really long time, and I think Raleigh has this just beautiful, artistic, creative community. But I do feel like it's a hard thing to be a part of when you are someone you're either supposed to just do the creative or you're just supposed to support it. The crossing of the two, since I do that professionally, but I'm also an artist, it feels harder to me.
Yeah.
To permeate that space as an artist.
If that's harder, why don't you just do one thing and get paid to write?
Because I'm a single mother. Reality.
Because it can't pay you enough.
No, certainly not. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, I guess I've always put work ahead of art because I've had to. And I do think it's different for women.
And tell me more about that. I mean, women who are mothers or just women in general?
I think the world expects you to be a mother who does, acts like you don't work and work like you don't have kids.
Acts like you don't work and work like you don't have kids.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
It is. And you throw the creative on top of that. When people view you through a particular lens, because where you are professionally in a small city like this, and then you put your artwork out there into the world, it feels a little bit scarier, I think, sometimes. Because you're supposed to be in order of these, excuse me, kind of these things you're supposed to be as a woman. Yeah. And maybe men experience this in a very different way. That's incredibly possible. I don't have that perspective. But it is challenging.
I don't think, I'll just say this, right? From my perspective, as a man who's married to a woman, who she's very creative, and I see, she's very independent. She started a business 16 years ago, making money, doing the things she loves. That's great. But I think the pressure, even on a woman like my wife, who's not who is not a mother, is like this rough pressure to. I mean, you said it so perfectly, but like this rough pressure to show, like, be encouraged by other feminists to be independent and to go reach for it and to do your thing.
Yeah.
But don't forget about cleaning the house.
Right, exactly.
And your husband, in sort of me, right, and to criticize me, I'm in this state where I encourage her to go do all these things. But I kind of still want to be taken care of like a little boy, right? And that pressure, I mean, this is just me, right? But I think that's exactly what the patriarchy is pressuring women to do. It's like, oh yeah, you want it? Go do it. But then
you also have to do 7,000 other things and be perfect at it.
Yeah.
And that sort of phrasing that I use, work like you don't have kids and have kids like you don't work. You could take kids out and put in anything else.
What's an example?
Of like, have a family, but still work like you don't have one.
Yeah.
There's this ideal of perfectionism around just the amount of work that women are supposed to do in this society that is, it's exhausting. And then you try to create art on top of that. I don't write as much as you do. I wish I did. When y'all talk about we write every day and you're sending each other poetry, I'm so envious of that because I don't have that space right now in my life. When I write, it does kind of pour out, and sometimes I'll churn out like 20 things in an hour, and that's a great day. And then I won't write for 2 or 3 weeks.
And that's because you have responsibilities.
It's
like, I mean, is that what you're getting at? That like you're a mother, you've got a paying job, you need to rest. You don't have the same freedom to just write whenever the hell I do.
I don't have the freedom, but it's not even that, because I think I would find it, Yeah. I mean, because y'all are busy too. It's definitely not a I'm so busy, poor me situation by any means, but just the emotional bandwidth, I guess. And then the consideration of the environment that I'm in as not you. I feel like some days I'm just this person that works for this agency. I'm just this person's mother. And those are beautiful things. I'm grateful for both of them. I'm lucky to have a job I love. My children are fantastic. But yeah, there's an emotional depletion, and you need that for your art. That's why I love being around you guys. Because it helps bring that out, because it gets very buried in all the things all the expectations. And I write about that a lot in my poetry because it's a constant thing that's in my head. So yeah, when you said audacity, and that's the first thing I thought about. Yeah. How dare you have the nerve to be professional and, supporting music and art in your state, but you're also a writer. You don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have time for that. You're not the artist.
This is such a beautiful outcome, like, because you may respond. It's a tricky position, somewhat in position, right, to ask a guest to respond to one's artwork and then expect them to say something like, they might be wondering, as you might have been wondering, I hope I say the thing that he meant, like the sort of trick behind the magician.
Yeah.
But like hearing what you said, like, is a whole, like, I think poetry, and you can tell me more about this if you believe so, but I believe that the sort of open to interpretation, I don't want to be oblique.
Mm-hmm.
I say things very plainly and very clearly in my poems. I try to.
Mm-hmm.
And the concepts are never oblique. I mean, the sort of like cleverness in the form may take some shape that is more oblique. Anyway, the point is that like the audaciousness, like for me, is just sort of being like, I look at like labor, like people, how people are making money. Like, I don't know, 8 billion people, like how many billion people are working? Many, many billion are actually working in this world doing all kinds of interesting things. Some more interesting to me than others, or some interesting to me but not something I would want to do, of interest to me to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm in a particular position where like I too like work a job that pays me, and then I create, and it pays me well enough with enough flexibility that I can go be creative.
Yeah.
And so like as it relates to the poem, I felt like there's a certain audacity when starting a podcast, or a certain audacity when doing anything new, that is ultimately strangleholding most people, because I think that they view it through the perception of other people's perception of them. And who does he think? Who does she think they are to go make this thing?
Right.
And I think I'm getting at a place in my mind where I think I know that was holding me back before, holding me back at times. Mm-hmm. I gotta believe in a sort of like a projection on the world that's holding a lot of people back.
For sure. Agreed.
So yeah, I think like then I've got stuff to talk on the sort of like, you know, where you the avocation and the vocation, where you get paid, you know, where you're more passionate and creative. But I guess the question is, I was just wondering, like, what would your dream job be? Like, you clearly like the job you have.
Right.
It's good. I don't think it's your dream job, probably.
It is in some ways, but
Okay.
it's weird to work in a creative environment in a state government agency.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of bureaucracy that happens around that office in supporting artists in general. I mean, artists kind of like, whoa, I don't want to deal with all the red tape and all the stuff the state government brings with it. So that's challenging. But I do love supporting music and artists and North Carolina music specifically. And I think there's a lot. I'm very passionate about that part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess it's not as important to me how passionate you are about this job, but if you could just magically have a job,
something.
I'll tell you mine, you tell me yours.
Yeah, okay.
Or you tell me yours, I'll tell you mine.
If I could do anything, I would write all the time. I would have a secondhand vintage store of some kind because I care about the planet. And I would sing. And that's all I would do.
That's great.
Yeah. How about you?
Secondhand vintage store.
I've got inventory.
You got inventory?
Yeah, I've been collecting for a long time. I actually went to school to be a fashion designer. It's just a thing I've always loved.
Where do you store it all?
Right now, it's just in a very small closet in my very old house, but it's packed in there.
In my very small closet in my
very old house.
That sounds like a good ending to a poem or title or something. But yeah, for me, I've always said I wanted to be an art director of a magazine, probably in the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
Like when print was king.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I mean, like, I want to direct, like, everything from editorial, graphic, like data visualization, if necessary in the magazine, but mostly photography.
Yeah.
And the look and feel of the layout, the font choices, the color palette, and ultimately like be part of a magazine that would, and of course it's a total wish or dream because, I mean, it's not, but that specific time period doesn't exist, of course, in print media and all of that. But I love the idea of making something in a durable format that people could smell the ink, feel the pages, be excited they didn't have access to it on demand, and ultimately there would be such editorial decision making involved in this final product that people are pretty damn proud of what they made month after month, or whatever the frequency was, right?
Right.
So that's always been my answer since I worked at a magazine when I was in my early 20s, kind of at the end of print, right around 2008. That's definitely one of them. But I think for me, it's like I always told myself, as long as I'm learning, like, and earning, like I'm happy enough.
Yeah.
And if it's a pretty broad, like, sweeping criteria, right? Because, like, I mean, you can apply learning, like, some of the shit I'm doing with my current job today, really boring, but I'm still learning things that I can apply to other things later, surely.
Right.
And I'm certainly earning, so, like, it's good. I mean, I think the saying is, if you can earn or learn, you're good.
Right.
If you can do both, you're great.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I feel pretty lucky that I've found a position in the state government environment that is creative, that supports creative people. And I think eventually, long term, another one of my sort of pie in the sky dreams is to have, I don't know, an old house that I flip into some type of artist retreat. I just think there's so much beauty that comes from people working together and just opening each other's minds. And I'm certainly taking the back seat in my professional role and hoping to let artists shine and support them across the state. But just being around them is energizing.
I think something that came up, right, that I wanted to ask you about, on our walk over here, and also just in what you're talking about is, like, in your professional life as well as in your creative life, if we call those your two lives. I want to know a little bit more about the value of collaboration. I mean, it's in support for other creators, and like what value. It seems like you fill different roles at different times, kind of shape-shiftedly.
Yeah. Can
you talk a little bit more about, like, for example, like in this artist retreat, would you be an artist contributing, or is this like facilitation for something greater?
The second one first, and then me second. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
I think, honestly, I have to go back to, like, when I went to... when I was in college, I had to work full time to go to school. And so I had to take time off sometimes just to work. I didn't graduate from college until I was 27. And in the time that I was working, I mostly worked in, like, the food and beverage industry, hotel environment, whatever. And that environment was so important in sort of shaping my work ethic, because you just do whatever you have to do whenever you have to do it. If you have to clean a toilet, you clean a toilet. If you have to clean up something disgusting, you just do what you have to do. And I think I've always kind of been that way. I'm the youngest of 3 girls. Even though I'm the baby, I was never babied. I was always the one in charge, like, taking care of everybody else. I just have that. I want to nurture people. I want to take care of them. And I think working in the hotel industry really solidified that. So I've always carried that into every job. So it's very easy for me to take a back seat and lift other people up. And I love doing that. But I also lived in Nashville for 6 years. And Nashville is an anomaly when it comes to collaboration. I think so many cities can find inspiration in how they handle it, because you would think it's so naturally competitive because Nashville is Nashville, but it wasn't like that. And maybe my perspective is just because I was in the nonprofit industry or environment or sector. People were so eager to work together. It didn't take convincing. It was like, okay, I work at the children's theater. You work over here at this other theater. Let's do a thing together. Bring all these people to the table. And everybody's got a different skill set. And you just sit back and you listen. You let people do what they do and be who they are. And I think that's really beautiful. I have to remind myself all the time, everybody at a table has a different skill set. Finding out what they're good at and bringing it to a head is what you want to do. And as a leader in my profession, it's important to be able to do that. I think Raleigh's gotten better in general as a city about collaborating. But I do think you have to remove sort of the narcissistic, ego, self-promoting side of it out of there. I think you'll get that. You'll get your self-promotion. You'll get to be part of a collective that does important work, but you can't come from that place.
Yeah.
It has to be really holistic.
So I have one other thing I want to read you in relation to that. But before I read it, I guess I just wanted to respond for a second and say that, like, I don't know, that I think that's a rare quality, right? To like be self-aware enough of your own potential, like, ego obstruction to take that aside and say, I work, with and for, and serve others, which serves me. I'm interested to know how often you feel like there are projects. Are you always building the thing, or are other people building things that you can actually just be an individual who shows up and is supported? Like, do you feel that exists?
It's both. It's primarily the former, especially the last 2 years. Like, I have built this music series from the ground up without a lot of hands-on support.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of mentors. Like, I've had artists that I can, like, pick up the phone and say, hey, I hit a wall with this, or I need something in this moment. I don't know what to do. And they're immediately helpful. Like, that's been, even though I'm doing the work, the actual hands-on part of it by myself, which is incredibly challenging
Right.
as a single parent, I have this lovely group of people that I've developed relationships with that I, even if it's just talking through stuff.
Yeah.
It's really, really helpful. But now I'm part of something that's being built where a lot of people are coming together. So this is going to require a lot of collaboration and a lot of work across the state. So, but I think what's so awesomely different about North Carolina is not just the heritage music, but the indigenous music too. Like, we have a lot of pieces that a lot of other states don't have. Like, I'm working right now with these ballad singers in the Appalachian Mountains, and they're singing songs that are, I think that the youngest or the oldest one, the youngest one is 150 years old. Like, they came across the ocean with all these Irish Scots immigrants. But then there are people in the Cherokee community who have their own version of that, and they're working together at this place called the Old Marshall Jail in Madison County. And it is like, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. And I think that makes North Carolina a lot different than other states, stories like that one. And that's just inspiring. Like, I get to be a part of this. What? How did that happen? It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the ballads are all, they're poems. They're just singing poems. It's the most beautiful thing. There's a woman named Sheila K. Adams. She's won the NEA Award for Heritage Fellowship. She's won the North Carolina Arts Council Heritage Award. She is this, like, 72-year-old powerhouse of knowledge, but so peaceful. Like, she could kick your ass, but she is so peaceful and lovely. And then her daughter, Melanie Penland, and then their cousin, Donna Ray Norton, they're just down-to-earth people, and they're doing this amazing thing. And I sit there as a person who writes and wants to sing, and I just feel really compelled to do it, even if I suck, And I think that was a hard thing for me to get over. Like, I grew up, like I said, the youngest of 3 sisters. We were all given a thing. You can pick a thing that you want to do. My eldest sister was an actress. My middle sister was the singer. I was the dancer. And you couldn't cross. Like, you're not allowed to sing. Like, don't even try it. So I grew up in this, this sort of mindset of like, oh, I'm not supposed to. I have my thing. And even though I was writing poetry in the 1st grade, that was never my thing. It was never really acknowledged as my thing. So you have a lot of hurdles to get over around singing. It's nice to be around people who are doing it, and then they're also doing it in this very storytelling way. It's not just they're not doing it for fame and glory. They're doing it to preserve a tradition that they've inherited over generations. It's very inspiring. So, yeah, very positive thing for me to experience as a person who wants to do more of that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So was your family, like, was it told you will be a dancer, or you kind of discovered it and wanted it?
It's a little of both. I think my mom always wanted to be a dancer. My first dance teacher was one of the original Rockettes, and I think my mom was pretty obsessed with that. And she was amazing. She was my dance teacher for at least 12 years. But I would dance pretty much nonstop from the age of 2 to 18. And then, some in college. I dance now still. I mean, it's definitely something I love and part of like who I am.
Yeah. Well, if you couldn't then connect certain domains, crossover, you clearly do now. So tell me what, like, I'm interested in your opinion on poetry and dance, and what language are they sharing, or modes are they sharing, or anything that makes them somewhat of a similar exploration or
Yeah.
articulation of
I've
something?
always thought they were incredibly similar because, like, when I'm dancing, I'm so lost in the words of whatever I'm dancing to. It is just like an expression of what I'm hearing. I completely lose sight of technique or where I'm at. My head's in the words. And so, for that reason, dance to me has just been like poetry in motion. I've always thought of it that way. I also think it's incredibly helpful for like my ADHD brain because there's such a process to it. And I find that after I've spent time dancing, I'm more prone to writing. Like it just sort of comes out in a very different way. The noise in my head gets a little quieter.
When you say poetry in motion and they're like, you're talking about the actual act of writing and the act of dancing.
Sort of, but also just sort of like the movement itself is poetic. Not necessarily because of the song or the words at that moment, but just the way that the body interprets the sound and the words. To me, it's like this physical manifestation of poetry.
So, would you say that in your mind, like, I'm just trying to play with this for a second. So, like, as you write poetry, you have something coming to your head that is encoded in letters, words, sentences. Mm-hmm. A lot of decisions are made, but ultimately there's something kind of guiding that.
Yeah.
And are you suggesting that you're kind of like your articulation of the poetic voice in dance is maybe listening to the music to a certain point, and then you're essentially putting it down on the floor as someone puts on paper?
Pretty much, yeah. And whenever I write, like you write so beautifully, and you have such great technique. I don't feel like I have technique. I hear something, I hear the rhythm, and I think that's because I danced for so long, but it's the rhythm. I don't think about the technique or the rhyme, or it just comes out in this sort of like songish way. And I think that's all like inside of me connected to each other. If that makes sense.
But where are you getting the imagery from? Because like the concept and the imagery, are they separate from, like, because the rhythms, kind of like, flowing.
Yeah.
In the pen or on your notes. But I'm like, when you sit down to write a poem, are you, and do you title it?
Not usually. I usually title it after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is the choice? Like, is it, you just have no idea what the poem's going to be, so you'll write the title afterwards?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm just like looking at this landscape next to us and the light, the way it's coming through, and that massive tombstone with this, braided tree, like just that right there. And I'm just going to write. I don't have any idea what's coming out. Not a clue. But there's just like the visual couple of words, and and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But that's how it comes out.
Do you want me to give you a piece of paper and write some?
I can.
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
I mean, I think we're all just wondering, well, what actually does that poem sound like? It's so funny how hard of a time I have writing when I'm told to write or when others are writing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not hard, it's just slower.
Yeah.
Like if there was a camera on me when I'm on the back porch alone, which would totally ruin the whole thing I'm saying is possible, it's just fucking rapidity. You know what I mean? Like, just vomit.
I know what you
Fast.
I think, Kara, you can read first.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. What'd you write?
I don't know how people run through this place. How can you not stop in that soaked sunspot just by the craggy stairs, rest in the shadow of her memorial, the light glowing red and green through summer's late leaves, the braided tree standing sentinel over fragile hearts, waiting for the crow's cry to wake them from a slumber. How do you run through this, the light of death? Even the flowers stop long enough to live.
Wow. So, the flowers stop long enough
To live.
To live, yeah. I just realized all of the imagery I missed, right? Like where I was focused, and you somehow were able to catch crows, craggy steps, flowers. You know what I mean? The color of the light. Yeah. And it's funny to have me respond to someone else's poem on this podcast because, I'm not necessarily good at that. But I just know when something hits, and for me that hit. That was really beautiful.
Thank you.
This one's called Shone Through. The regal root display is braggings. The healthy green leaves let enough light through. The carved scars from past people show their age as they stretch with each year's increased diameter. And this powerful being will watch, season after season, probably to outlast us all, the addition of more souls venturing in the cemetery, bodies alive and bodies dead, but souls the same.
Love that.
Classic empathy. Just like around the tree.
Yeah, that tree is majestic.
Oh,
You know, like you stayed. I love how close you stayed to this stuff.
Yeah.
yeah, you talk about that,
perfect.
I
right?
just spin the fuck out every time I write a poem.
What's that?
I just spin the fuck out every time I write a poem. Both of y'all were so inspiring. It was about this, right?
Should we break a wall and have you come into the frame and read?
Yeah, I do.
What about audio?
It'll pick it up sweating. It's called Muscle Beach.
Just be loud.
Yeah. Muscle Beach. Green yellowed by sun, blue sun pumping through green leaf and low cloud and atmosphere, casting gold upon a headstone, elephant-sized. Green leaves of grass and saplings holding this hill in place along with the tangled beach, doing much of the muscle work here this morning, and every morning since before me and before you, and after me, and after you, for me and for you.
Love it. That's,
Woof.
It's a beech tree. When you know what kind of tree it is,
yeah. That's awesome.
Like beach, B-E-E-C-H.
B-E-C-H.
Yeah.
it's my favorite tree.
Yeah.
You remember, was it gum or mint?
Fantastic.
Beech nut?
Yeah. Well, beech, they make nuts.
No, but it's like an old brand.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
There was a
I
gum.
should not be asking you, youngin.
Yeah.
Nothing. Sorry. I mean, you look younger than me, but
I think it was a gum.
it was a gum.
I think so.
Beech nut.
Yeah.
And then what were chock full of nuts?
Coffee.
It
That's
was
coffee.
coffee.
I'm
Yeah.
like, where the hell does that?
Going in for the win.
What? Yeah.
That's awesome.
What the hell? Like, how does that even come about? Like, these are just like mysteries. I never look up because I don't care enough. But also, like, you at a party
But
and it's
why?
awkwardly standing there. You're just like, so, you know where a chock full of nuts comes from? And then you end up meeting the person who's like, yeah,
Actually, I do.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it.
My great step uncle,
Right.
I blame someone.
So I have, I think we could pick up on some themes that we've talked about. I think it might be interesting to finish this poem and go to another, but maybe to read it one more time
Okay.
and just see if there's anything else left there.
Okay.
Does that sound okay? Or do
Yeah.
you want to go just to another one?
No, go for it.
Actually, I'm going to have you read it to me.
Okay.
All right, so it's that one. Passably professional.
Passably professional. Impossibilities usually defeat, as we are conditioned to characterize our attempts to create as the audacity to do so. But my greatest effort is to normalize reaching for it. And audaciousness need not be, because we prop up and we walk beside our future collaborators, directly and implied.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing more about what you think about the first. I mean, there's a few things, right? Because we focus really on the audacity side of things, about like sort of the audacity to create.
Right.
But I'm also wondering what you think on impossibilities usually defeat. What that means to you, because I mean, just as a poet to a poet, like I don't know if that's too oblique or sideways.
I mean, do you mean just like basically convincing yourself that it's not possible to do a thing, and so therefore you're defeated because you've let every influence make you think something is impossible? Essentially. I mean, I think artists are sensitive people. We're our own worst critics, and I think that we can easily talk ourselves out of doing stuff. But I think now that I've like read it out loud myself, I'm leaning more into like that last line about collaborating, because just sitting here with y'all talking about poetry and life and whatever, I feel like anything's possible. And that's the beauty of collaboration, being around other artists.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what am I talking about? Of course I can do that. I might not be able to do it exactly the way I'm thinking about it, but maybe it's even better. You know what I mean?
Most definitely, yeah. I mean, I think to sort of respond to, I mean, I was kind of just asking, like, how that works, the impossibilities defeating, and absolutely. I think for me, it's really just sort of starting off the poem by saying, like, a certain thesis that is, like, then, like, sort of teased out further, at least, like, these impossibilities, like, everything that is actually good, that we cherish, that we love, whether it's directly a piece of art or a product or a an experience. I think most people do these things in spite. All the good stuff came from someone doing something that other people said
they couldn't do it.
Not only could you not do it, but like, why even try? You're gonna get hurt, And the question that I have also is, am I even hearing these people talk to me, or is this just my own internal monologue, right?
Right.
And if it's my internal monologue, how is it related to the greater cultural norms? And is this a useful thing, right? Because it could even be a useful thing that says culture actually selects for those people who can overcome the impossibility of defeat, and therefore we get the best stuff, because only those people are the ones who are brave enough and courageous enough, So, I mean, I think about this in so many ways. I don't actually know what's true, but I do believe that for me, at a very simple level, like, I get plenty of value out of just saying, I want to do that, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And then seeing what happens.
Right. Right.
But again, I think the best creations probably never came in some laboratory that was trying to, like, sort of follow a recipe for how to create. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was somebody just saying, I have this urge that this thing would be interesting to at least one other person.
Right.
And if not, just to me. And to them, that's okay. Kind of enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And we talk about, I mean, just from the perspective of supporting musicians, that it's not about the musicians' number of followers, really, at the end of the day. It's how they interact with their fans. And if there's only 5 of those people, that's great. There are 5 people who love what you do, and no matter what you do, they're going to love it.
Yeah.
You hope, right? And it is kind of the same thing. I don't know. I think that generationally, our age group is a little bit different than, like, the generation beneath us. My parents were children of parents who lived through the Great Depression, and they didn't think art was a way to make a living, So there's a lot of discouragement from the onset. And then you throw in the factor that if you think creatively, you often are constantly kind of like picking apart your own stuff. At least I do.
Yeah.
I'm so critical of myself. It's ridiculous. It's almost debilitating. But then finding people who are like-minded and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can do this because other people are doing it, or they're encouraging me to do it, or they've inspired me to do it maybe differently than I thought it looked before. That's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I've obviously thought of this idea that like we're in a golden age, or as best as it's ever been for creators, in the sense of what a low barrier to entry there is. You know, buy a digital camera, buy a mic, write some stuff, draw some stuff, digitally conceive of media, and you can make money.
Yeah.
And like the whole currency is a digital, like is pixels or bits or whatever being traded around about concepts. You know what I mean? So it's like, for me, I'm starting to recognize more and more that this is just a golden opportunity. But I never really thought about, like, it's not just the technical, right, that enables this, but it's also like all the things that came before where people were toiling to make, I mean, through very shitty and cool history over the last few hundred years, to make a sort of like reality that we have today, where we're sipping coffees with a DSLR camera, mic'd up, talking, and we're off work. You know what I mean? We have no responsibilities. Like that's some sort of an ideal like level. But I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think that makes it easier to create than previously? Like,
I think it makes it easier to say I am a creator or I am an artist, for sure, because I feel like there's strength in numbers, right? And there are more people identifying or saying that they're an artist or whatever, or they're creating something. Do I think it makes it easier? Yes and no. I mean, I kind of struggle with the idea of being an Instagram poet. You know what I mean by that? Like, just there's sort of a negative connotation to that when you read like academic criticism of poetry. There's a lot of like, oh, Instagram poets. It's not real, right? I think it's real. I do it all the time. That's such a great outlet for me. It's been such a great space for me to get back into writing because it's quick. I can just like, I'm at a stoplight and I'm like, oh, thought a thing, gonna write it down, gonna post it, whatever. Do I have a lot of followers? Not really, but that's okay. I'm happy with the amount that I have.
Right.
So it's easier as far as like there are vehicles for me to do it. But I don't know that it's necessarily easier to become successful.
Well, one interesting thing you said, very interesting thing, is just this idea that academics think Instagram poets are not real. I want to learn a little bit more about that, because, like, to me, academic poetry is what has kept poetry from, like, continued to keep poetry, so only poets are reading poets. Right. And, like, it's not, you know, there's no accessible. Def Jam poetry slam, you know, like, there was, like, and then there was nothing like it was 200 years ago. Yeah. And the reverence that people have for the poet. So I'm really interested in like that criticism, because immediately I'm like, fuck you. Yeah. Like, obviously you're the problem, not the Instagram poet, right? You're the critic who doesn't count.
Well, academia is so, I mean, it's the word I want to use. It's so, they're in their own way in so many ways. I mean, I just came from an environment full of academics, and I was constantly told, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that, because academia doesn't allow for that. Like, you just can't, period, end of story. And that was in a professional context, in a museum setting. It's really frustrating. But I literally canceled my Poets and Writers subscription because they were talking such trash about Instagram poets. I follow a lot of really amazing writers on Instagram.
I just think that there's a pejorative in someone's mind called Instagram poets. It's like, I would love for us to sit down and think what that is like this. Like, it feels like a gatekeeperish, like, just get with the times, motherfucker. Right. Like, Luddite.
Yeah, for sure.
Perspective. And I don't know if they're criticism, because I haven't read any of it, nor do I really care to. But I don't know if it's kind of like, well, you know, people like Sam are just posting things that he writes in 30 seconds and not showing like care, or if it's really the fact that, well, anyone can do it because it's Instagram and all you have to do is make a post.
Right.
And I just think that's the whole fucking draw to poetry, and why there can't be a gatekeeper is precisely because anyone can do it, and there are no fucking rules.
Right.
That's the only reason I like it.
Right. I personally think that there's just, I hate to use the word jealousy, but it's the word that comes to mind, because we're not stuck in a box. I don't think people who are writing right now on that platform or other platforms are stuck in that box. I mean, I had poetry teachers in college that were terrible because I wasn't writing based on their technique and what they learned and the structure that they said you have to do it in. I was free forming all over the damn place. And they were like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, but I can. And I'm going to.
Watch me.
Yeah, exactly. My poetry teacher, my main poetry teacher at NC State was Gerald Barracks, who was an amazing writer, a very difficult and complicated man. And he hated everybody's work. Like, he was just hard as shit on everybody. I was the only person in class with an A. He's the only teacher I ever had that was like, it's not, you're not writing per these rules, but that's okay. The way you're writing is working. And then I was late for the exam and he failed me in the class, but it's a whole different story.
I had a graphic design. I was in a typography class. Chris Palacio, who was an adjunct faculty in the design school at Ohio University, and basically he started the class by saying, yeah, very few of you will get A's. Most of you will get C's or B's. Mm-hmm. So just like prepare yourself for that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I got a B-.
Yeah. Nice. But it's the same kind of thing in design. I'm a self-taught graphic designer. Yeah. I taught myself that skill because I was designing clothes and I loved that. That wasn't going to be a long-term thing for me. I didn't have any financial support to be a fashion designer. And I wanted to incorporate design into what I was doing in the nonprofit sector. It needed it. It needed branding. It needed marketing. It needed all these things. And the nonprofit sector at that time was like oblivious to any of that. And so I taught myself how to be a designer. But then I meet designers who are trained in it and they're like, oh, you should not be doing that. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. I'm like, fuck you. Well, it's working.
Yeah. I mean, I think the pragmatism and the sort of like urge to learn something to get something done.
Yeah.
Because like the necessity, mother of invention. Right? Like this idea that like, it is good enough usually.
Right.
And what's really interesting to me on design is actually doing graphic design professionally, branding, identity, web design, way back when. And then like working in a job where there's, like a marketing director and content marketing people, and I work for a tech company. And it's just funny because they'll like tear my slides apart. Mm-hmm. And then people who are not even like at all like in the realm should be telling me like the kerning or the letter spacing or the font choice.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny because I don't let anyone know my background. Like I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Because ultimately, like right now, I'm not paid to think about that shit.
Right.
I love being paid to think about that shit, but I'm not. And I think, sorry, that was just a side note, but as it relates to this idea of like, again, gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Everything I've ever studied has shown that the people who make the greatest cultural contribution to a domain, right, which generally is measured by like a useful novel thing, not just novel for novelty, but like a novel sort of connection, they come from outside the domain.
Right.
And oftentimes that's because they aren't constrained by too much schooling telling them how it was done before.
Yeah.
Now, I personally believe in a very good balance of reverence for the domain, learning the domain, up to a certain point. But I think different domains, like if I was a heart surgeon, study the fucking domain, right? Of course. Poet, doesn't really matter. Like I'm not gonna hurt anyone.
No.
By fucking up.
No. And I mean, I love poetry. I've been reading it my whole life. I couldn't function without it, but I'm not gonna write like the people I read. I write the way I write. I had a moment this morning where I was thinking about how I write a lot about whimsical stuff. And I think that comes from like, and I've always kind of beat myself up about that. Like, stop writing about the moon. Nobody cares. But I think as a child who was like very self-sufficient, very much left to her own devices, constantly in charge of things that I probably shouldn't have been in charge in at certain ages, I leaned into that so hard because it was what grounded me, and it was sort of my like saving. And you know, do other people look at that like, oh my God, she's writing about the moon again, I can't take it? I don't care. I mean, I do. I want people to like what I do. I want them to like it as it pertains to their perspective. I want them to, and Shay and I were talking about this, I think, at the last workshop. I don't necessarily like to tell people what I was thinking when I wrote something. I want them to interpret it from where they are in that moment in their life. But ultimately, I write how I write. It comes out the way it comes out. I don't really have a whole lot of control over it, honestly.
So let me ask you this. You don't have control over it. You write the way you write. Where does the audacity come to publish it? If you're already being as critical of like your sort of self and your limitations, perceived limitations, right?
Yeah.
Like, where does the audacity come to put it on Instagram? Or read it in front of a crowd at Paradigm?
That is, reading is definitely, well, it's two things. Pushing me out of my comfort zone, because I speak professionally in front of people all the time. It doesn't bother me. But reading my own work in front of other people, that was hard. That was a hard thing for me to do. It's very personal. I've struggled with a lot of stuff over the last a few years. I have PTSD. I have a terrible eating disorder. Like, I've had a lot of shit I've had to deal with in the past few years, and reading really personal stuff was challenging. So that, I'm very thankful for that. And I'm thankful for y'all's constructive feedback and stuff. It's really helping me. But then publishing on Instagram, I guess because there's the barrier of the people reading it not really knowing me.
Yeah.
I care less. I care so much less. It's like, I'm at a stoplight, I'm having this feeling, I'm writing it down, and I'm sharing it, and cool, people like it.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's just a totally different thought process.
Does that inform? Okay, so I'm thinking about this. Like, first of all, thanks for the explanation. The idea that I've been thinking a lot about this sort of consensual dialogue. Mm-hmm. This idea that on a social media platform, because I've been criticized for a few things that I do on social media, and it's totally valid. But ultimately, I've always said, well, you can fucking opt out at any time.
You can unfollow me, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, to be as brazen and as clear as possible, and I give that many fucks.
Yeah.
Like, unfollow me, because I went from 302 to 301 followers. I didn't notice.
Yeah.
And even if I went down to 1 follower, I wouldn't even notice, because, you know, I mean, that's kind of my stance, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how this influences or instructs your life. Like, is your life in philosophy instructing this sort of audacity to say, well, I'm at the stoplight, I'll see who cares, and if no one cares, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, do you have that same audacity in the way you dress, and the way you converse, and the way you socialize, or the way you experience others in this world? Like, do you feel that confident, or is that more confident?
I think that the confidence is, how do I describe this? The confidence isn't, I think the confidence comes from like, this is just who I am. It's not like I'm so great at this, everyone should read it. It's so, you know, or I'm good at my job or whatever. It's just, I know I'm trying really hard, and I know that I feel like I'm doing the right thing by my soul. And that's where the confidence comes from. It's not by like measuring myself against other people, or, you know, making sure I need to hit this goal by this age or whatever, because clearly that boat sailed. I just turned 50, but it's just like, does my soul feel good about what I'm doing and what I'm putting out into the world right now? And if the answer is yes, then I'm like, well, then I feel great.
Yes. So again, I love that description. How does that instruct or inform when you're not creating work, but you're in the world? Like, are you comfortable? A lot of people aren't, right?
Yeah.
And we're all growing towards ideally more comfort of being ourselves in the world. And like, for example, I'm trying to figure out, like, constantly Like, am I talking and then waiting to talk, or am I listening? And what does that have to do with my own insecurity being in the world?
Yeah.
And so I think like social media is really interesting for me to look at in the way that it is informed by who I am and also informs who I am potentially, because like that idea that you are essentially trying to make your soul happy and then you're confident, like, is a really great ideal. Like, if one learns anything from this episode, I think that idea of like, just try to make your soul happy, and then you'll walk with a head held pretty high.
Yeah.
And as you said, not cocky, not hubristic, not arrogant. That's all self-obsessed. This is more of like a deep-rooted, like those fucking roots,
right.
like bragging almost of how sort of secure they are.
Yeah.
You know? And I think, because I know, I'm sorry, I'm overwalking the question, but I know that both of us sitting here are insecure people. Like almost anyone who would be sitting here is.
Right.
The question is, do we know this about ourselves, and do we care to get better?
I do know this about myself, and I'm actively daily, every minute aware of it and trying to make it better.
Sorry, that was supposed to be rhetorical.
Yeah.
Yes, you
no,
are.
I know, but I was saying that just too because I think that I don't know exactly how she said it, but when I was like in high school, Sinead O'Connor, who I adore and always have, always will, said something about going to sleep at night. If you can go to sleep and know that you did everything you could in that day to make yourself better and to make the world better, then you can sleep in peace. And I think that is my goal every day. Did I do things today to help other people, to support them? Did I do something good for the environment? Did I do something good for myself? Are my children happy? Are my children, you know, I beat myself up all the time as a parent, especially because there are all these goals and measurements for your children. You know, they should be in 75 extracurricular activities and be super whatever.
Right.
Are they happy? Are they smiling? Do they go to sleep peacefully? Are they taken care of? Do they feel loved? I'm good. You know, and I'm not measuring myself by this society that we're in. It's so unhealthy. And unfortunately, social media perpetuates a lot of the problem. But the thing I love about my poetry account versus my personal account is that account is just poetry. Like, I follow a few artists, I might follow a few photographers. It's just writers, and we're all kind of like expressing these similar struggles, you know, and it's a good reminder that we're just human.
Yeah, I think to sleep peacefully, like, what a attainable goal. You know, like measurable.
Yeah.
And attainable. And just sort of like a humble goal for each day. And it sounds like what you're saying is like, don't look for any outside metric to judge.
Yeah.
You know that yourself. Kara knows that. Sam knows that self for themselves.
Right.
And ultimately judge if you're sleeping peacefully.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, consider
why.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And do you think usually the reason is a lack of gratitude, or a permeation, like letting the sort of the world seep in and sort of fuck with you through the metrics? Like, yeah,
I think it's lack, you know, can certainly be lack of gratitude, lack of self-awareness, you know. Not perfect at it, but I do try to be self-aware. But also, I think we did this exhibit at CAM when I worked there 7-8 years ago called The Ease of Fiction. And just the concept of the title was just the things that you convince yourself are true. And that has stuck with me forever. Like, why am I getting hung up on this? Do I really believe this thing that's getting me so hung up? Or is this being dictated to me by outside forces? And that could be my family, it could be society, it could be work or whatever. And I ask myself that question a lot. Like, am I just falling into the ease of fiction? Is this the story as it really exists, or is this the story as it's being told to me? Those are two very different things. And usually if it's not the story that actually exists, it's just a story that's being told to me, that is when I don't sleep peacefully. I don't have the best behavior. You know, I'm not doing things that feed my soul or that help other people. So fuck that.
So social media, it's really interesting that we're talking about like your exhibition-ism, not in a negatively connotated sense, but you know, your output, throughput through Instagram, and particularly a poet account. And I don't know, it almost seems to be a certain subversive nature to creating this thing, this voice that is fully, peacefully sleeping Kara, that gives people, because this is how I'm interpreting now, right? That you are giving people a break from all the other miserable shit that's on there.
Right.
By A, being completely authentic, and B, being very humble. And C, most importantly, not afraid to share.
Yeah.
Like that, like, I don't think we ever really understand the sort of like the root system of our contributions and in how many people we touch. Mm-hmm. And that just intensifies, magnifies, and grows those connections potentially through Instagram or social media. Mm-hmm. But it enables dialogue with those people, mm-hmm. which is cool. And maybe in a format behind a computer, they're more comfortable telling you how they feel, or you know, if you get feedback.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because it's like, it's also, as you scale that, you don't necessarily hear the histories of lives that you have impacted. You don't necessarily know how to trace it back to source.
Right.
And so I believe, you know, coming back to this idea of like why I wanted to have you here on Staying Attuned was, I mean, you're a poet who I found out about the KV Poet at the KV Poet on Instagram through some way, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And it seems like both of us just doing our thing, which again, I don't think a lot of people really, I mean, I get a few likes on a post. I post way too often. Last year was a mess, but it's a diary that maybe has the chance of intersecting with someone else's diary.
Yeah.
And it did with us. And I'm like super grateful for that. And so like, again, how we measure the impact of the things we do, we often don't know how. So we look for external validation. And it's still external hearing it from me, but I guess I'm just telling you what you curate as what you produce and what you put out, throughput into Instagram, attracted me to you and eventually set the stage for people to be hearing us in discussion in ways that never would have happened, right? There's just all these miracles as you trace back to source, mm-hmm. and go way before that and way before that and way before that. All the sort of miracles that led you to the place to be right here today. Mm-hmm. And this is just a future past miracle. This right here is just a future past miracle for anyone paying attention to it, or just for us. Maybe no one ever hears this fucking shit. The tree did fall. No one was here. Doesn't matter.
Right. I love that. It's a poem right there.